Bruce Lee did not overpower her. That was what unsettled the witnesses most. The challenge came from a female wrestling referee during a closed practice session. Those present said Bruce Lee never tried to dominate the exchange. They said the result was clear before control ever became visible. Chicago, Illinois. Community Wrestling Gym. May 22, 1969. Thursday, 7:06 p.m. The ring had been assembled for routine use, not display. It sat beneath low ceiling lights that flattened shadows and revealed every worn seam in the canvas. The ropes were tensioned to regulation, not polished or replaced. Chalk dust clung to the mat from earlier drills. Nothing in the space suggested an event. Nothing suggested that what would happen there would be remembered. This was a practice ring. People came and went without announcement. Wrestlers finishing conditioning, referees checking equipment, trainers exchanging brief instructions. There were no tickets, no posted schedule, no audience arranged beyond those who belonged to the room by habit. Conversations stayed practical and incomplete. The atmosphere was controlled, familiar, and deliberately narrow in purpose. Bruce Lee arrived quietly. There was no introduction, no pause in activity. He entered through a side door used by staff and stood near the apron, hands relaxed, posture neutral. He wore plain training clothes, unmarked and functional. No belt, no insignia, nothing to indicate role or hierarchy within this space. That absence mattered. Some assumed he was visiting. Others continued their routines without reaction. A few noticed how the room adjusted around him, how voices lowered slightly, how movements became more deliberate without instruction. The change was subtle, but it spread. Bruce Lee did not step into the ring. He remained just outside it, weight balanced, gaze unfixed. He did not inspect the ropes or test the canvas. He did not stretch or warm up. He appeared to be waiting, though for what was not clear. The ring felt more exposed, not because it had changed, but because attention had narrowed. Drills concluded cleanly and did not immediately resume. Those without direct tasks found reasons to stay nearby. The space between the ropes remained empty without anyone asking for it to be cleared. There was no challenge announced, no rules stated, no indication that anything beyond practice was expected. Yet the feeling that this should not be happening here began to surface. This ring was built for repetition, for enforcing rules, correcting form, maintaining order. It was not meant to host questions about control. Bruce Lee's presence introduced one without naming it. He was not there as a trainee. He was not there as an official. His role remained undefined. Someone asked quietly whether this was planned. No one answered. What followed was not agreement, but accommodation. People shifted to the edges. The ring stayed open. The gym continued its routine, but its purpose felt momentarily suspended. Witnesses later described the moment the same way. It felt as if practice had paused, not stopped, but held, while something informal and irreversible settled into place. She had been present long before Bruce Lee arrived, not as a performer and not as a figure who needed to claim space. Her authority in the gym was procedural, earned through repetition rather than display. Wrestlers adjusted their behavior when she stepped near the ring, not because she demanded attention, but because she represented structure. Rules were enforced cleanly when she officiated. Boundaries were maintained without argument. She was a wrestling referee by role, but her presence extended beyond officiating. Her build reflected years spent close to bodies under strain, solid through the shoulders, grounded through the legs, balanced in a way that suggested familiarity with leverage rather than spectacle. She did not move with the exaggeration of performance. Her posture was economical, shaped by the necessity of staying close to action without becoming part of it. People respected her judgment, not because she raised her voice, but because she did not need to. When she intervened, it was decisive. When she corrected positioning, it was precise. Wrestlers listened because her calls held. Disputes ended when she stepped forward. The ring responded to her presence the way it responded to rules, automatically. She moved easily around the practice space, checking rope tension, observing drills, offering brief corrections when form drifted. Nothing she did announced importance, yet the environment aligned itself around her movements. The ring, already structured, became more exact in her proximity. Bruce Lee stood outside that structure. He was not part of the gym's hierarchy. He wore no indication of role within this space, no referee shirt, no training affiliation, no marker of authority as this environment understood it. Leaner than most of the wrestlers present, lighter in frame, he did not match the physical expectations usually associated with standing near the ring. That contrast was noted quietly. Some assumed he was there out of curiosity. Others speculated that he had been invited to observe technique. A few dismissed the comparison entirely, believing the difference in discipline made it irrelevant. No one treated the moment as a challenge yet. She noticed Bruce Lee without reacting. There was no visible change in her posture when she became aware of him, no look held long enough to register confrontation. She continued her work with the same measured attention she gave everything else in the room. That composure reinforced her authority more than any assertion could have. When Bruce Lee was acknowledged, it was indirectly. A brief exchange between those overseeing the session clarified the premise in careful language. Not a contest, not a test of strength, a question of control. The words were chosen sparingly, as if too much definition might create expectations no one wanted to own. She listened without interruption. Her expression remained neutral. She did not question why Bruce Lee was involved. She did not ask for clarification of his role. She looked at him once, briefly, assessing posture and balance, the way she assessed everyone who stepped near the ring. Bruce Lee did not respond in kind. He did not step closer to the ropes. He did not adjust his stance. He did not meet her gaze for long. He remained where he was, hands relaxed, weight centered, as if waiting for the situation to define itself rather than attempting to shape it. That restraint unsettled some of the witnesses. This was a space where authority was usually reinforced through proximity, stepping into the ring, taking position, signaling readiness. Bruce Lee's refusal to adopt that language left the balance undefined. The referee turned fully toward him then, not as a challenge, as acknowledgement. There was no hostility in her stance, only readiness. She stood as she always did, balanced, composed, prepared to enforce control rather than assert it. The room felt the shift immediately. This was no longer routine practice, but it was not yet a demonstration. It was the moment when procedural authority met an unknown response, and neither side moved to define the outcome first.
The shift happened quietly. At first, nothing appeared to change. Conditioning drills continued. A pair of wrestlers finished a sequence and stepped back to reset. A trainer called out a correction and moved on. The gym remained active, but the rhythm that usually carried it forward began to loosen. People stopped rotating. Those who had completed their drills did not immediately leave the mat. They lingered near the ropes, tying laces that did not need tightening, wiping sweat that had already dried. Others leaned against the walls, arms folded, eyes no longer tracking instruction, but position. Practice was still happening, but attention had moved elsewhere. No one announced a pause, no whistle blew. The ring simply began to hold space in a way it had not minutes earlier. The area inside the ropes remained empty, preserved without instruction. It was not claimed because no one wanted to be the first to claim it. Bruce Lee stayed where he was. He did not step closer to the ring. He did not retreat from it. His posture remained unchanged, upright, relaxed, balanced. He watched without scanning, without narrowing focus. The stillness was not disengaged, it was deliberate, and it drew attention precisely because it did not compete for it. The referee noticed. She completed what she was doing and came to rest near the apron. Her stance was neutral, weight evenly distributed, hands free. She did not step into the ring. She did not call anyone forward. She waited, the way someone waits when control is already established and timing matters more than instruction. Whispers began to circulate, not loudly, not with excitement, in fragments. Someone mentioned control. Someone else questioned whether this was appropriate. A third dismissed the concern and then stayed anyway. The language stayed careful, technical, incomplete. No one framed the moment as a challenge. No one claimed responsibility for what might happen next. The lighting made the waiting harder. Overhead fixtures cast flat, even light across the mat and ropes. There were no shadows to hide in, no corners softened by darkness. Every hesitation was visible. The ring looked more exposed than it had during active drills, as if stillness had removed its usual cover. Bruce Lee shifted once, barely enough to register. He adjusted his footing to face the ring more directly, aligning himself with the space rather than stepping into it. The movement was small, controlled, and unaccompanied by tension. It did not read as preparation for action. It read as acknowledgement. That was enough. Conversation stopped mid-sentence and did not resume. The sound of the building, ventilation, distant traffic, the faint creak of the ring posts became audible in the absence of voices. What had been routine had become observation. Not the kind meant for demonstration, but the kind that precedes definition. The sense that something was about to be clarified, not through force or performance, but through a single moment that would not announce itself. No terms were stated, no countdown followed. The gym held its breath without knowing it, understanding collectively that whatever happened next would not need repetition and would not belong to practice once it occurred. The moment did not announce itself. There was no instruction to enter the ring, no signal to begin. The ropes remained still. The mat showed no sign of preparation beyond what practice had already required. Yet those watching would later agree that something had shifted, not through action, but through the narrowing of possibility. The referee moved first, not into the ring, but closer to it. She placed one hand on the top rope and tested its tension out of habit rather than necessity. Her posture stayed neutral. There was no theatrical claim to the space, only the familiarity of someone who understood where control lived and how quickly it could be lost. Bruce Lee stepped forward once, not into the ring, to the apron. He did not climb through the ropes. He did not test the canvas with his weight. He stopped at the boundary, hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders loose. The decision to remain outside mattered. It preserved the distinction between practice and demonstration without naming it. The referee acknowledged the position. She stepped into the ring alone. Her movement was economical,
practiced. She stood near the center, feet placed for balance rather than reach. Those who knew her recognized the stance, not for engagement, but for intervention. This was how she positioned herself when control was the objective. Bruce Lee did not mirror her. He did not raise his hands. He did not shift his center. He remained upright, balanced, attentive without anticipation. The exchange that followed was brief, not a grapple, not a test of strength. The referee closed distance enough to establish contact, precise, controlled, correct. Her hands did not seize or strike, they guided. The intent was not to overpower, but to demonstrate whether balance could be taken without resistance. Bruce Lee did not resist. He did not brace against the contact. He did not counter it. He allowed the pressure to register. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, balance shifted, only slightly. Bruce Lee stepped once to correct his position, a controlled adjustment rather than a stumble. The movement was quiet, measured, and complete. He did not fight the correction. He did not reclaim ground. He let the moment resolve itself without interruption. The referee released contact immediately, not because she had to, because the point had been made. She did not follow through. She did not attempt to extend the exchange. Her posture returned to neutral, as if the demonstration had concluded exactly where it was meant to. Bruce Lee did not step further in. He did not reset his stance. He did not respond with technique or speed. He remained where he was, hands relaxed, expression unchanged. Silence followed. No instruction came from the edges of the room. No one called for continuation or clarification. The absence of escalation carried its own authority. What had occurred resisted easy framing precisely because it had not been pressed. This was not a contest decided. It was a condition revealed. The ring remained unused. The ropes stayed still. And the space seemed to recognize that nothing further could be added without turning the moment into something it had never intended to be.
The room did not respond right away. There was no sound to mark completion, no exhale, no murmured reaction, no instinctive movement to fill the space the exchange had left behind. The moment had been too contained, too restrained to demand an immediate response. Bruce Lee had already stepped back from the apron. Not abruptly, not defensively. He returned to the position he had occupied before anything had occurred. Hands loose, posture neutral, attention unclaimed. He did not look toward the ring again. He did not wait for acknowledgement. His withdrawal was complete without appearing deliberate. The referee remained inside the ropes. She stood where she had released contact, weight evenly distributed, stance unchanged. Nothing about her posture suggested effort or strain. There was no visible sign of success or surprise. Yet those watching sensed that something essential had shifted. She did not call an end. She did not address the room. She did not explain what had just happened. The authority she carried did not require it. People along the edges began to move slightly, not away, not closer, but enough to signal uncertainty. A trainer folded his arms, then unfolded them again. Someone adjusted their footing and stopped. A few exchanged glances that asked questions no one was prepared to voice. This was a space accustomed to resolution. When balance shifted, it was usually followed by instruction. When control was demonstrated, it was reinforced through repetition. What unsettled the witnesses was not that Bruce Lee had been displaced once, but that no one seemed interested in proving anything beyond that. Quiet explanations surfaced. Someone suggested Bruce Lee had allowed the movement. Another argued that allowance was irrelevant if balance had shifted. A third dismissed both interpretations as incomplete. The conversation stayed subdued, technical, unresolved. No voice carried authority enough to close it. The referee listened without reacting. She did not correct the speculation. She did not validate it. Her silence allowed the uncertainty to remain intact. This was the point where confidence usually reasserted itself through repetition, clarification, or escalation. None of that happened. The absence of continuation became its own conclusion. Bruce Lee did not re-enter the space. He did not step forward to reset terms. He did not offer explanation or context. He remained outside the ring, unengaged, as if the exchange had answered the only question it was meant to. The referee exited the ring calmly. She did not look toward Bruce Lee as she stepped through the ropes. Her movement suggested closure without declaration. The ring, moments earlier charged with attention, returned to being an object rather than a stage. No one suggested repeating the demonstration. The silence made that decision collectively understood. What had happened could not be clarified by doing it again. Repetition would have changed the nature of the moment, turning restraint into performance and control into proof. The refusal to continue preserved what had been revealed. Practice resumed gradually, not because the moment had been resolved, but because it could not be. Confidence had not collapsed dramatically. It had simply encountered a limit, one that force, explanation, or authority could not move past. And in that quiet recognition, the room accepted that whatever certainty had existed before the exchange no longer applied in the same way.
The gym returned to motion without announcement. Drills resumed in sequence. Conditioning continued. The ring was used again, but not immediately. For a time, it stood empty, ropes still, canvas untouched, while work carried on around it. No one referenced the exchange directly. The absence of commentary felt intentional, as if speaking too soon might assign meaning that had not yet settled. Bruce Lee was no longer present. Those who noticed his departure could not say when it happened. He did not leave at a natural break in activity. He did not signal conclusion or offer farewell. One moment he was standing near the apron, unremarkable in posture. The next, the space no longer accounted for him at all. The gym closed around that absence with the same efficiency it applied to everything else. The referee continued her role as before. She enforced boundaries. She corrected positioning. She moved through the space with the same measured authority she always had. Nothing in her demeanor suggested doubt or reconsideration. Yet those who worked closely with her in the weeks that followed noticed a subtle shift, not in confidence, but in emphasis. She spoke less about dominance, more about positioning, less about advantage, more about timing. When balance was discussed, it was framed as temporary rather than owned. Control, she suggested once, was not something you held, it was something you maintained until it was no longer available. No record was made of the session. There were no notes filed, no report written, no attempt to formalize what had occurred. In a place built on repetition and verification, what could not be reproduced did not require documentation. The moment was allowed to remain informal, untested, and therefore intact. Outside the gym, the account began to shift. Some remembered Bruce Lee being displaced. Others insisted it had been allowed. A few claimed the moment had been misunderstood entirely. The details changed with retelling, but one element remained consistent. No one could agree on what the exchange proved. Among those who had been closest, the memory stayed restrained. They spoke about the silence that followed, about how neither side had attempted to claim authority over the moment, about how escalation had been possible and deliberately avoided. What lingered was not the movement itself, but the decision not to turn it into demonstration. Bruce Lee's name surfaced quietly after that.
in conversations held off to the side, in remarks offered without insistence. Those who mentioned it did so carefully, without embellishment. Those who had been present rarely corrected anyone. They understood that explanation would narrow what they had witnessed, reducing it to technique or outcome. Years later, there was still no record, no photograph, no written account, no agreed conclusion, only the shared understanding that for a brief moment a question of control had been asked in a space designed for answers, and the answer had resisted definition. Those who remembered it did not describe a victory or a loss. They described a pause, a moment when certainty hesitated, balance shifted once, and nothing rushed in to claim what followed. And in that hesitation, unclaimed, unrecorded, and unrepeated, the session found the only form of permanence it would ever have.
No insignia, nothing to indicate role or hierarchy within this space. That absence mattered. Some assumed he was visiting, others continued their routines without reaction. A few noticed how the room adjusted around him, how voices lowered slightly, how movements became more deliberate without instruction. The change was subtle, but it spread. Bruce Lee did not step into the ring. He remained just outside it, weight balanced, gaze unfixed. He did not inspect the ropes or test the canvas. He did not stretch or warm up. He appeared to be waiting, though for what was not clear. The ring felt more exposed, not because it had changed, but because attention had narrowed. Drills concluded cleanly and did not immediately resume. Those without direct tasks found reasons to stay nearby. The space between the ropes remained empty without anyone asking for it to be cleared. There was no challenge announced, no rules stated, no indication that anything beyond practice was expected. Yet the feeling that this should not be happening here began to surface. This ring was built for repetition, for enforcing rules, correcting form, maintaining order. It was not meant to host questions about control. Bruce Lee's presence introduced one without naming it. He was not there as a trainee. He was not there as an official. His role remained undefined. Someone asked quietly whether this was planned. No one answered. What followed was not agreement, but accommodation. People shifted to the edges. The ring stayed open. The gym continued its routine, but its purpose felt momentarily suspended. Witnesses later described the moment the same way. It felt as if practice had paused, not stopped, but held, while something informal and irreversible settled into place.